We're now going to have Sonia Focke, coming all the way from Germany also, talking to us about the hornbow, Egyptology's problem child.
All right, can you hear me all right? Okay, just give a yell if you don't. Yes, I should say this is also rated PG-13 for violence. The hornbow. What, when, where, and why? The where, at least, is Abydos, El-Kab, and a few other places, which we'll see also. The when is First Dynasty, the tombs of the First Dynasty, and most particularly the tombs of Den and Ger. Here, Zerta, this is the plan of Petrie from his royal tombs too. And the first mention ever made is from the publication of Amelino. What you might not know is that before Petrie was there was a man called Amelino. He was a Frenchman. And Petrie actually actively petitioned to take the concession away from him for various stunts, such as supposedly when he found several pots that looked alike, he'd smash two of them, if he had three, so that the third one would be worth more. And things like finding a nice jar with the original contents, namely a nice fatty substance, mentioning in his diary that it burned well for 3 days. On the other hand, Amelino did a very nice publication that's mentioned the contents of each tomb. So here we have, this is the tomb of Ger, and mentioned in the subsidiary tombs 29, can't see anything, 80 had two fragments, 85 and 92 were the mention of antelope horns found there. And he even had a nice plate. Unfortunately, he failed to mention on his plate which pieces came from which tomb. And so we see a variety of fragments. This is one of the longest fragments that have survived. And actually, this piece I've been able to find again. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to see it in real, so to speak. First, I was just starting my job. Then Berlin moved. Now I'm moving. At some point, we'll all stop moving, and I can actually see this piece. It's now in Berlin, under the accession number 18041. Then the accession was taken over by Petrie. Now, Petrie wasn't quite as kind in saying where he found things. He just sort of gave a general, here, Tomb of Zerta. This is Ger. Today, we call him Ger. And then just basically showing objects of wood, and some of them, this one is particularly shown as being horn. Not saying whether he found this in the subsidiary tombs or in the main tomb. I'm guessing subsidiary because Amelino found them in the subsidiary tombs, but who knows, maybe some of them were found in the actual tomb of the king. For those who are unfamiliar with the Abydos burials, there's the main tomb of the king. That was the one in the middle, for the king, and these were retainers of various types. And Petrie, on this plate, shows two pieces of hornbows. One is the tip of a hornbow here, and another is the plug. We'll see in the construction what role the plug had. And these two pieces, actually, I've been able to find again in the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. Thank you to Alice Stevenson, who mentioned them to me. And there's actually another plate. It's the elusive plate 7A in the Petrie publications, Royal Tombs 2. Petrie not only published a main volume, he also published a volume of extra plates that was only available to EEF subscribers. Now, in Munich, we actually have that volume of extra plates, and I was really happy when I finally figured out that 7A was in a separate volume. So I took it down, and I opened it, and I had 6A, and I had 8A. So I can't show you this. It's actually the most interesting of all because it has the most complete of the fragments found on it. But, well, you do what you can. These are the fragments now housed in the Pitt Rivers Museum, which I saw on Friday, so this is breaking news, so to speak. This is one of the longest ones, and he actually has several tips. This is the tip of the bow we saw. Where's the plug? This is the plug. And this is actually, I looked at it, and I'm pretty sure it's not part of a horn bow at all. I'm pretty sure it's actually a piece of bone. First of all, it has a different coloration, and for those who don't know, horns are hollow. So all of them have holes in the middle, running through. But this one is shaped differently. Also, the cross-section is more sort of square. I think it's a rib bone or something like that, but who knows? We'll need material analysis. I'm not good enough to actually tell. Abydos is not the only place horn bows have been found. There's one that has been found in Tarkhan, in a grave that is unfortunately undated, but definitely early dynastic. So this is a piece from Tarkhan. And another one was found in Mer. And this is an interesting piece. To know how I know about it, there actually has been a study on horn bows done by Ludwig Keimer. He published it in the Zeitschrift für ägyptische Sprache und Altertumskunde, number 72. It was in the 1930s, I think 1936. And he found this piece accessioned in the Journal d'Entrée as coming from Mer. The problem is it's not actually mentioned in the publication by Ahmed Bey Kamal. So Mer is mostly Middle Kingdom date, the finds from that excavation. So that unfortunately we don't really know what date this is. It could be Middle Kingdom, if it's the same date as the majority of the finds from that area, or not. I'd like you to pay particular attention to the rippling here. This rippling is very interesting because it allows us to find out what sort of horn this is. Shortly, because this is important, how do you make a horn bow? You have a central plug made of wood. You take 2 antelope horns, you take them off the skull, maybe put boiling water to take away all the goo that's in the middle. Goo is a technical term, isn't it? And then you shove them onto the plug. And that's basically it. You might want to do a bit of working on the knocks. We'll see about that. There's a thought that they might have been wrapped in the middle. But basically, you take 2 horns and you shove it on a wooden plug. All right, this is apparently too easy. Because in Egyptology, the horn bows, I always found this very fascinating. I came across it and everybody was saying that they couldn't possibly work because horn was either not elastic enough. Actually, that's the main complaint about it. Whereas the composite bows, which also include horn in their construction, were always praised for, the military marvel that they are. They're very powerful things. Just a few examples. Bonnet says that bows made of massive horn, there is no such thing as massive horn except at the tips. They would have been made of hollow horn. Couldn't possibly work because they would have broken or split, shattered, rather than bending, because horn possessed no elasticity. What is more, he says it was quite difficult to make them and would have required more time than making a simple wooden bow. Sort of depends on how much work you're going to be doing on them. Gilbert, in his Weapons, Warriors, and Warfare in early Egypt, says that they were for ceremonial use only, as the stiffness of the oryx horns would have prevented the bow from being drawn efficiently. Keimer says horn bows may or may not have been functional. The ones from Abydos, probably not. They're from different gazelle types, according to him. And particularly the ones from Abydos have a horn plug. We're going to see that later. whereas the mare bow with a wooden plug could possibly have functioned. And Lucian, he worked on bows in the late 19th century, said that ethnological comparisons were mostly theater weapons, so used for ceremonial or other display purposes. There are a few that concede that horn bows may occasionally have worked, or possibly yes, okay, we can concede. Bonnet says that the elasticity would have been given by the wooden plug in the middle. So basically that would have bent and that would have allowed the bow to have been used possibly, if you want to be nice. Partridge thinks it comes from the bowstring. If it worked at all, the bowstring would have given the necessary elasticity. Keimer again says that the difference is whether the plug is made of horn or wood. And Anja Herold thinks that they did work. The Berlin bow has a very smooth surface, so it doesn't have the rippling that we saw in the mare fragments, for example. And she thinks it was pared down to an oval cross-section and could possibly have worked then. So I found this very interesting. And I started thinking, well, why couldn't it have worked? I mean, really. Some of these arguments were rather odd, such as the wooden plug in the middle giving elasticity. You don't want a bow that only bends in the middle. You want a bow where the distribution of strength is as equal as possible. Obviously, some bow types are going to bend more in the middle than others. Some of them bend almost entirely at the tips. But basically, this is a view of various tillerings, they're called. This is an ideal or a very good tillering where the arc is very gradual on both sides. Here we have one arm that bends more than the other arm. You don't particularly want that either. This is one where only the tips bend. And this is basically what our horn bow would have been, where just the plug in the middle bent. But of course, when you're thinking about the plug, only the plug in the middle actually giving way, well, what about the horns that are on it? Wouldn't they split because the plug in the middle is bending? So that sounded a bit dubious to me. And then there's the question of only the string giving elasticity. Now, some strings are very elastic, but no, seriously. Why bother with a bow at all? You can just have a slingshot. So that's when I decided to try and reconstruct my own horn bow. So first, catch your oryx. I didn't have to catch an oryx, thank God. I just went to my local leather merchant, who often had horns, and mentioned that I was looking for oryx antelope horns, and he said, oh, well, I have two here. Okay. Otherwise, you can find them on eBay. They're part of a very popular souvenir from Africa, which is basically a shield with crossed spears and an antelope skull on it. And those antelopes are a form of oryx. Now, how do we know it's oryx? Basically from these mare fragments with the rippling that you find on the oryx antelope. Also, the shape of the horns. Now, Keimer was of the opinion that the mare fragments were from Oryx beza, which has relatively straight horns, and the other ones from Oryx leucoryx. Now, Oryx leucoryx is an Arabian oryx. It's mostly in the Arabian Peninsula. Was extinct in the wild, but now they have reintroduced some herds in Oman and Saudi Arabia and Israel, maybe some other places. So I wasn't going to take leucoryx. I thought there are too few of them. I wasn't sure about Oryx beza. It seems to be more confined to a lower part of Africa. The only oryx type that so far is certain to have been in Egypt is Oryx dama. And Oryx dama was present in the whole northern African area from Morocco down to Niger, I think. Has a somewhat lighter coat. It very, very curved horns, apparently. Well, anyway, I wasn't going to take Dama either, because there aren't any left in Egypt in any case, and it's not in a very good state in terms of a species as well. My horns are most probably not even from Beza, but from Oryx gazella, which that's the horns you find on eBay. And over most of the rest of the African continent, they're still present in fairly large numbers and are still hunted. So, all right, I caught my oryx. What do I do next? Well, I want to make my plug, right? Because I want to shove it on something. I need something to shove my horns on. Oh yeah, previously, the horns I got were very long. They were 95 centimeters long, which is longer than the longest surviving fragment from Egypt, which was about 76 centimeters. So I decided to pare it down somewhat. I don't know if this was a good thing to do, which we'll see. These are the horns. I basically cut off about this much. Here it's a lot thinner than around here. The walls of the horn are a lot thinner. And that may have changed its properties, but we'll see about that later. So anyway, I cut off a bit of it to try and approximate more the length of the Egyptian horns. But first I wanted to know, does a horn bend? Yes, it does, actually. We put it in a vise. And this is for those who are interested in the open-air museum in Molfse near Kiel. And I'd like to thank my husband and all the others who use the forge there for letting me use their vices and other tools. So this is the horn. Nobody's pulling on it yet. I put the little red thing so that you see about where the center is. And here's somebody pulling on it. So you see it does bend. And actually I found out in between, there's a wonderful book, or series of books rather, called The Traditional Bowyer's Bible. And it's a series of articles from people who make bows in the traditional way, and have been doing so for many, many years. And if you don't have your own experience, it's nice to hear about the experience of other people. And they mentioned that horn is actually 4 times more elastic than wood. It can store 4 times more energy. So it's actually a bit harder and stiffer than wood, but once you get the bend in it, it stores a lot of energy. So now I had my horns, I pared them down. I had to get up to my plug. Now at the time I had not actually seen, I was very young, I was just out of university when I started this. Took me 3 years to finish it because my workshop was on the other end of Germany from where I was, which made it a bit difficult. I just thought, oh, what the hell, I'll go do this. I haven't actually seen any original pieces. Actually, the first time I've seen them was last Friday. As I said, it wasn't easy to get to the Berlin bow at the time. And, well, I didn't have much chance to go to the UK. So I had this from Petrie saying, plug from a horn bow. Now we had that one very complete horn bow here. This is the one that would have been on plate 7A, had I ever found it. And that Keimer illustrated, fortunately, which shows the construction. And Keimer says that the plug here is not actually wood, it is horn, possibly also Orthocoryx horn. Okay. He didn't actually have it analyzed, but he seemed to think he knew what he was doing. And we have a second plug, which is this one, which is now in the Pitt Rivers Museum, and which was among the plate illustrating wood. Now we saw the tip of the horn bow was specifically designated as horn, as being something else than the rest of the plate. Whereas this piece wasn't specifically designated as being horn, so that it seemed likely that it was wood. And the mare fragments also had definite wood remains inside. So should I make my plug out of wood? Should I make it out of horn? I have to say, I've seen this plug now, and I can't tell. It has the same discoloration as the horn fragments, which seems to say, well, probably horn. On the other hand, it's a bit damaged, and the damage shows concentric layers of material. Now, I don't know that much about how horn is actually formed, but I'm assuming it may also be formed in concentric layers of keratin. On the other hand, it did seem a bit thick to be so solid. All the tips of the bows that I observed in the pit rivers, some of them were cut off at the ends, and you could still see a pinhole where the horn was still basically hollow almost to the tip. So if this is horn, it's probably not oryx horn, because I don't see how oryx would have had enough material, solid material, to make the plug. I'm tending to think it's wood. I'm hoping that maybe we can get it analyzed at some point. It's not a definite project, but the people at the Pitt Rivers Museum seem to think it was also a good idea. So anyway, we definitely had a horn plug in Mare, and I didn't have any horn that would be big enough for a plug, so I decided to use wood. Is that really a good reason? Maybe, maybe not. I was trying to see if the basic concept would work. I used arbor vitae. It's a very elastic wood. It was also there. I didn't have any acacia or tamarisk or any Egyptian wood, so I had to make do with a European one. And since I'm not a whittler, I wouldn't say I'm hopeless with wood. I can make it about the shape I wanted, but I'm very, very slow, so it took me several hours with a drawing knife. The ancient Egyptians, naturally, we saw this morning, would have used an adze or some form of flint scraper, possibly. This is the first dynasty, so there were copper tools available. And I know that whittlers can get things into shape, and with a whittling knife, they go like this, change it, go like that, and then it's done. I needed several hours, which just goes to show you can't trust the time. You can't trust all the times given for production by modern reconstructors, because the modern reconstructors just haven't been doing this all their lives. So in German, we call this a marriage. It's a step in production when you shove something onto something else, which is actually a very good definition of marriage. So I shoved my two horns onto the horn plug, and actually it's a pretty tight fit. I had trouble shoving it on completely, but the horns still tended to twist a bit. And was I intelligent enough to actually show? No, I wasn't. We'll have to go back. Here on the Mare fragments, there's a little hole at the bottom of the horns. These may have been used to thread some sort of thong, possibly a leather thong or rawhide thong, to keep the horns in place. I was just happy that on my second try, the first plug cracked. The wood wasn't seasoned well enough, which taught me a lesson. I was pretty nervous. I was nervous enough sawing the things off. I thought, oh my God, what if I make a mistake? Next time, I don't think I'll be quite as nervous making my second horn bow. So I decided against it. We put some glue in. Now, the ancient Egyptians did have glues. They had adhesives. We know that some early arrows had adhesives used to fasten both the foreshaft and the arrowhead to the shaft. On the other hand, in woodworking, they tended to prefer binding. So which one was used here? I don't know. I decided to stick with adhesive for my first bow. The next part was, well, you have to put the bowstring on. And so we wrapped the bowstring on, made our knots very tight, took it, drew it. Oh, it's drawing pretty easily. Oh, yes, the knots are stretching. We need something to keep the bowstrings in place. First of all, because you can't do proper knots on both sides. You need one fixed knot, and another is a slip knot, because you can't keep your bow strung all the time. Keeping your bow strung all the time will set it, will weaken it, so it won't draw as strongly, it won't be as powerful. So you'll need one end knot and then a slip knot. So unfortunately, nobody had thought to actually tell us. Keimer, who looked at a lot of the original bows, didn't think to mention the nocks. And all I had at the time was this interesting picture by Petrie. And it looked a little bit as if an extra piece of horn, or whatever it was, had been shoved onto the end of the horn. This is actually a feature that is known from West African bows. They have wrappings at the ends, to stop the string from going down. And there is actually an ancient Egyptian bow. This is from the tomb of Sebek Ii, Middle Kingdom, now in Berlin also, 1360, which had papyrus wrappings at the end. So I wondered, well, maybe that's it. Then I got the accession cards from the Petrie Museum prior to actually looking at the pieces, and he mentioned well-shaped nocks. Now, I knew I wasn't going to get to the Pitt Rivers Museum. Sorry, Pitt Rivers, not Petrie Museum. So I had to make a judgment call. And, well, then, of course, there's this piece from Tarkhan, which seems to have a sort of worked knock of some sort. And these are nocks from composite bows. Now, few people actually mention the nocks on normal self-bows. These are from MacLeod. These are the composite bows of Tutankhamun. So, right. So how would a knock on an Egyptian bow, on a self-bow made of only one material, or in this case with a wooden plug in the middle, look like? This is a bow from Munich. You can see there's a kind of notch put in. So I decided to make a notch. And then I was kind of nervous about the other side, where the permanent knot would be. And so I kind of made a step here. Since then, this was around Easter, and since then I've decided that was a mistake, because this bow doesn't actually have anything on the other end. This is where the permanent knot would go, and you'd probably just make sure it was really, really tight. What you need is something to catch the slip knot, because the slip knot is not going to be as tight, obviously. Well, anyway, this is how it looks. This was our first stringing before we went into fancy knots. This is the one catch, and this is the step. So I'll do it differently the next time. This is, after all, what this is all about. Of course, now I've seen the Petrie fragments, and I'm sorry, this is very... I took pictures of all the fragments, and they're all lovely pictures, except the one that interests me the most, which came out blurry. But you can see that it's not a piece that's shoved on, it's actually carved. It's a kind of ring carved into the end of the bow, of the horn. So obviously there was a carved knock of some sort, and this would probably have been quite sufficient to just stop the slip knot. This are some other tips. This one seems to be worked. Unfortunately, the surface is very much damaged. But it does seem to be worked to have a sort of step here. Whereas these two ends, these are two different fragments, are not worked at all. So this would probably be where the permanent knot was. This seems to be a natural sort of end curve. A lot of the pieces seem to have it. Berlin seems to have it. It seems to be a natural end curve. My bow kind of had a little wiggle at the end also, if not as strong as this one. You'll see it in a minute. All right, so now we got our bow, we got our string. There is evidence for both gut strings and linen strings in ancient Egypt. Gut strings seem to have been prevalent. I had absolutely no experience with gut string, but my husband had some experience making linen strings for his medieval Mew bow and mine. So we decided to go with the linen string. Also, now I realize I could probably get gut from either there are some music stores that sell gut for stringing early music instruments, and otherwise a butcher's might probably have given me a piece of gut or sinew. So we made a cord, a linen cord, out of linen string. And then, of course, well, how are we going to do the permanent knot? We have no surviving permanent knots from that period. But we do have a nice 6th dynasty piece now in the British Museum. And this seems very similar in its construction to the end knots from the bows from the Tomb of Soldiers, which is early Middle Kingdom. So since this seems to have gone from the 6th dynasty at least to the early Middle Kingdom, who knows, maybe it was older as well. And this is a slip knot from the Tomb of Tutankhamun. So we know they had slip knots. All right, we're set. We have our string, our permanent knot, which I did here. Perfect. We have a slip knot. We have our knock. We have a nice bow. As you can see, it's pretty big. It's almost as big as I am. And the ancient Egyptian ones would have been smaller. First of all, as I said, the longest arm, the longest horn found up till now has been 76 centimeters. And all the fragments that I saw in the Pitt Rivers Museum were also a lot thinner. So I'm thinking either the horns were from younger animals, or it's possible that they pared down a lot, because we see the Berlin fragment is smooth along its whole side, so that here the ripples were probably taken off, whereas they were left on the mare fragment. All right, so I want to string this, right? That's the permanent knot. That's one way to string a bow. This is from Beni Hassan. All right, now, I'm 159. I won't say how much I weigh. And I can bend my bow. And you can see I'm nervous. Either that or it's the coffee. All right, this isn't a very good stringing. I just managed to bend it enough so that you can get an idea. Should be a bit more tension in here. Unfortunately, I can't string it when it has more tension, because then the cord is shorter, and I can't bend the bow enough in that. It's by the way, stringing and actually shooting the bow are two different things. I have a yew bow that I can't string, but I can shoot it. It's just a different way of applying pressure that you need to put in, and this, you don't have to actually do it for very long. You just have to sort of go to your ear, quick, draw, release. I can just about, well, that's not a lot, but, you know, it'll get better. I might, what I might do is intentionally set this a bit. When my husband is there, this is the finished bow, in pretty pictures in case you're interested. Of course, you have it here, and you can all touch it if you like. This is my husband. As you can see, he's this big, beefy guy. He can draw it a lot better than I can, and he's the one who strung it the first time. So I'll get him, when we're back together again, to string it a few times and maybe let it intentionally set a bit so that it's not quite as strong. But though it is strong, you still can bend it. So the question is, first of all, with a smaller bow, it would probably have been easier to bend. It would not have been quite as strong. Would a normal Egyptian man have been able to string and shoot a bow? Personally, I think so. They weren't quite as tall as my husband, who's 190. But these would have been people who lived a hard life. They would have been very muscular. And bows have been known I kind of cheated. I knew about this before. Actually, I knew about this. I'd already bought the horns. This is from the traditional Boyer's Bible. So other people have actually been reconstructing ancient Egyptian horn bows, though they didn't know they were doing it. This is Tim Baker, and I love this quote. The easiest to make, most durable, and most awesomely primordial-looking bow is likely the Gemsbok takedown. A Gemsbok is the same thing as an oryx. This bow is made of 2 Gemsbok's horns shoved onto a whittled stick. Total construction time, 10 minutes, if you can whittle. Estimated lifespan, 400 years. And his bow shoots at about 100 pounds. So it's also a very strong bow. I hear that apparently in Africa, very strong bows were sometimes used for elephant hunting. Now, at the time, I don't think there were any elephants left in Egypt. Early dynastic period, I think they were already extinct there. But it might have been a bow for hunting large game, as opposed to smaller game like the actual oryxes here. These are a few of the fragments from the Pitt Rivers Museum, and of course, it's not experimental archaeology if you don't have more questions at the end of it than you did at the beginning. One of my questions, of course, is, well, how does another smaller bow that may possibly be a bit pared down, I think I might smooth it the second time, how would it be compared to this one? Of course, I want to shoot this one actually on the archery range, see what sort of range it has, see if I can maybe get some way to measure arrow speed and things like that. That would be very interesting. And as you can see, these are rather thin-walled pieces. And they have these weird notches all along their length. And I'm not entirely sure what this is. Now, I do know Egyptian bows were often wrapped, either for decoration or perhaps other purposes. Was this maybe something to keep wrappings? Was it a ritual destruction of the bow before they came into the tomb so that they wouldn't harm the tomb's owners and the king in the afterlife? I couldn't say. Or is it maybe from the removal of the rippling that for some reason, notches came up? I really don't know. It's something I didn't notice on the photographs, but that I noticed when I actually saw the pieces. So these are the next steps. Properly document the draw weight of the bow. There are various ways to do that. You can put weights on it. There are also special weighing machines for bows. The draw weight is basically how much weight to draw a certain length. Obviously, I need to see the Berlin bow, and I'd like to go to Cairo at some point and see the fragments there, including the one, that almost complete bow, and the mare fragments, which are now, I think, or at least in Cameron's time, were in the Agricultural Museum. And of course, make a second bow. See if I can find some smaller horns. Maybe they were from younger individuals in Egypt. Make the nocks accurate, of course. Not because they work any differently, but because you want to be accurate. And possibly see, maybe even make a third bow. Make one that I leave like this, and another one where I really take off material and make it thinner, give it a truly oval cross-section. This is slightly oval, actually, especially as you get near the tip, which is what all the Pitt Rivers fragments were. They also have a fairly oval cross-section, if you look at them. Not completely, but very slightly. They're wider than they are, they're thinner than they are wide. And of course, compare these and see, were they easier to draw? Are they all just very powerful bows? I think I've demonstrated that they do work. They're just very strong. Okay. Maybe a few interesting aspects around the horn bow as well. It has often been thought that the hieroglyph, this particular hieroglyph, T9, represents a horn bow. So This would be the wooden plug with the two antelope horns. I don't know. I think when you look at it, this is another version of the bow hieroglyph. I think it rather represents the typical double curved bow, which is the typical self bow of ancient Egypt. A self bow is a bow that is only made of one material, usually wood. Depictions of horn bows do not abound. There aren't that many depictions of the bowmen from the early dynastic period, but take the hunter's palette. It has also been suggested that these may be horn bows, but I don't think so, because they also have that typical double curve that you find in later representations. This is a fragment from Lisht. It was reused in the Middle Kingdom pyramid and is actually from the Old Kingdom. And I can't see it quite as well, but you can see that the tip is quite similar to these bows from the Tomb of Tutankhamun. This is a particular type of self bows. The easiest type is basically a segment of a circle, a simple stave, and these probably required some sort of forming, of shaping, maybe steaming or softening in water. This is probably the bow that's shown being formed in the Beni Hassan depiction that we heard about earlier. So I rather think that this is this kind of bow because, I don't know, the curve of the horns I just don't associate that with the curve of an oryx horn. Also interesting, most of the fragments we do have is from the early dynastic period, with the possible exception of Mer. Now, in the Middle Kingdom, these are two fragments from first and second intermediate period, so we'll assume that maybe in the Middle Kingdom they were also equally decorated. These are from the Petrie Museum. They're decorated with small bands here, and here with a sort of zigzag pattern. Either these were purely decorative, or maybe they were meant to evoke the stronger bows made out of oryx horns with the rippling of the horn. I don't know. But it's an interesting question of how long the horn bows actually survived. If this fragment from Mer really is Middle Kingdom, then it definitely survived a long time, but is simply not prevalent in the archaeological remains. There has also been a certain amount of talk that the horn bows were sort of the precursors of the later composite bows, the New Kingdom composite bows. And in fact, I think it's Bonnet, yes, it's Bonnet, who said, that two of the early New Kingdom composite bows actually had a very similar form of construction. Namely, this is the bow from the tomb of Amenhotep II, and there's another one, or rather two fragments from the tomb of Penhat, which is a bit earlier. Oh dear. I think it's Tutmosis I, which he says were basically a sort of horn sheath shoved onto a wooden core. Except that he said that the core in this case went through the hole of the bow, which would have given it the necessary flexibility that a horn bow would not have had, supposedly. However, oh, no, I have to do it manually, sorry. This is the cross-section of the Amenhotep II bow. Now, this was done by MacLeod. This is wood. This is horn. And the stippling can either be horn or sinew. MacLeod seems to have thought that it ought to have sinew because most of the other, well, actually, no two composite bows are made exactly the same thing, the same way, but most of them have both horn and sinew. However, D'Arcy, in his description in the Catalogue Général, mentioned that there was horn on both sides. But he says it was, let me see, do I have the quote? That'd be nice. I don't think I do. Yes, I do. It's basically a strip of wood between two strips of horn, each of the same thickness. If you like French, l'arc est fait d'une latte de bois dure et épaisse de 6 mm à 7 mm, placée entre deux lames de corne de même épaisseur. La section est elliptique. So, basically, a slat of wood surrounded by two slats of horn. So nothing about a sheath of horn going over it. Either Bonnet had heard from somebody else, had not read D'Arcy, or he didn't understand French. But this is actually a very interesting example of how errors can be translated in Egyptology, because Bonnet is one of the two main, was for a long time at least the two main sources on weapons. One was Wolf, who was actually spoke very positively of horn bows. He said there were finds in the Near East that were made of horns of passing antelopes, and he thought that they were perfectly functional weapons. And then there's Bonnet with his Waffen der Völker and his Antiken Orients, they both came out at about the same time. They both came out around 1926. And of course, these were the two base works for ancient Egyptian weaponry. And he made that one mistake, and of course somebody copying from him would have made it again, and so on and so forth. And maybe a lot of people might have thought that this was basically a sort of horn sheath shoved onto a core of wood, which it is not. It's a perfectly normal, in as much as there is anything as a normal, composite bow. So that's all there is to say right now. I took in Oxford, and I thought it was a nice way to end the evening, since it's getting late and we're all very tired. I thought something nice and fluffy. I took this while I was in Oxford. It could also, of course, have been dinner, but I didn't have my bow with me. So this is a basic, let's say this is the first step of an experiment. Finding out about horn bows, making our first model, making mistakes, obviously. Also learning a lot. And personally, I think it's very nice. Learning that you always need a strong man with you. You have to find a way to put them in your pocket, but you always need a strong man with me. If I had one with me, I would have done an archery demonstration. It was actually planned in the beginning that, maybe people could have had a go with the bow and everything. But as things stand, unfortunately, I can't, because not enough tension. And right, so it's the first step, hopefully, in a series of experiments, and let's hope that I learn even more from the next ones. Oh my goodness, we have 10 full minutes for questions.
Does anybody have any questions?
The notches
Yeah.
that you describe, are they on the inner surface of the bow?
Well, that wouldn't make much sense, would it? It has to catch on something.
And those notches?
Oh, yeah, on the Pitt Rivers fragments. No, they're on both sides.
They are on both sides.
If they were on the inner, oh, you mean to sort of bring more stress relief?
In the bottom picture.
Well, one is on the inside, on this part, and this one actually goes along. Sorry, I'm pointing to my screen and you can't see anything. The notches, this one is on the inner part of the bow. There's another one here, which is, you can't see very well, which is on the outside. This one kind of goes all around.
I'm just wondering about the compression though, because the inner surface would be under compression and the outer surface under tension, so that would give...
As a sort of release for the compression. But unfortunately, no, they're not only on the inside. It is, of course, possible that... The thing is, I'm afraid that if you make actual notches, it would weaken the bow too much. It would weaken it not only in terms of strength, but also in terms of structure. As much as I hate to say it, I'm sort of leaning towards a ritual. Yeah.
Good question.
Yes.
Now, when you put the slip,
Yeah.
what would happen if you had them in not just one place, but a couple of different ones? Just as one or two, not too far apart, something like that.
Well, you could...
It's possible, and it might be used for different distances, or remember, I know nothing about this, or like some people who might be shorter or taller, that if you put the slip knot section in a different place.
Yes and no. This is one of the longest fragments. I think it's about this long. So the notches would have gone up to down here. And what you don't want is two arms that are too unequal. Actually, bringing it lower would strengthen the bow rather than weaken it. So the question was whether the notches was, the different notches might have been to have a different height to put the slip knot at.
Could those, if you've got two pieces of cord,
Yes.
and they're not equal, could you put a notch in one of them to sort of balance it up, adjust the springiness of each side, bring them equal?
The notches maybe to equalize if you have two horns of slightly different strengths.
Yeah.
I don't know. The thing that bothers me about the notches is that I'm afraid that it would weaken it structurally, really, that there'd be a chance of snapping. Like I said, I was going to set my bow, but this is setting is more in the fibers and everything. It doesn't weaken it structurally, it just makes it not as strong, if you see the difference. I'm really afraid that the notches, some of them are rather deep, would be basically a breaking point, sort of a pre-preparation break here. Of course, I don't know. I have to actually make a bow and notch it and see what happens.
Could possibly that piece of horn have been have a second use? It's been finished with as a bow. It's been used as a point for a cord of some description.
The second use of the piece is
Not been used for that.
possible. What I neglected to mention is that arrowheads were found in at least 3 of the subsidiary graves of that Aménino dug up. So that it seems likely that the arrowheads were in conjunction with the bow and that they were really meant to be as a bow. Of course, we have one complete bow, which made it almost intact. But it is possible that some of the fragments were reused.
Amy?
I was wondering, is it possible to treat the horn, such as heating, to change its shape or improve its elasticity or anything like that?
I'm told yes. I haven't tried it yet. I actually have the end fragments from it still, and I wanted to try steaming them and see if I can get them out of shape. Any other questions?
Yeah. When I was taught to shoot a bow many,
Yeah.
many years ago, I was told that the edge of the shaft of the actual arrow would be resting slightly against the bow itself when you draw. Right where the rings are, the horns. So do the rings of the horn then cause a problem with accuracy?
That's a good question. The question is whether the rings would cause a problem in accuracy, because basically what you're doing is you're putting your arrow here, and it's also resting against the rings. It's also resting against your hand, which is what it's actually resting on. I don't know. That might be the reason why the Berlin fragment, for example, was smoothed out, because it might have gotten in the way. I did add some leather here to kind of even everything out because it was a beast to grip. They may have wrapped it, in fact, completely to even that out. Thank you.
Okay, one last question, and that's it.
Yeah.
On the bow, one picture, are the notches?
I'm wondering if there's two with an aiming guide. Or even have the rest.
All right, this is the longer fragment. Like I said, it's about this long, much thinner though.
That's too far.
And it would have been maybe here. So that is too high. One thing I have been wondering, a lot of bows were wrapped in various places, and wondering if that was an aiming guide. We have a bow with traces of wrapping in Munich, but unfortunately the wrapping is also too high. It's also not in the right place for it to be a kind of knock wrapping like the West African bows. So they seem to have been really decorative. They may, of course, have been, the notches may have been there to add wrapping to, as a kind of support for the wrapping. That's also possible. But maybe not as an aiming guide. Maybe, or, I mean, it's also possible. They like symmetry sometimes, or very often they like symmetry. If you had an aiming guide, you might have added a few other notches to make it look nice. Then again, I've always found that it's better not to aim. The few times I've shot a bow, if I aimed it, it went next to it. But if I just kind of looked at the target and thought about the target and then just pulled back and shot, maybe not bullseye, but I definitely hit it.
Thank you very much, Sonia.